Hello, Bio30. Let's continue our conversation about stress and the stress loop. So today, we're going to continue learning about long-term and short-term stress and how it's activated in the body, but specifically, what does cortisol do to your body during long-term stress? So you should already have been able to diagram the different pathways of stress, short-term and long-term, and identified where cortisol is secreted from. Now we're going to look at what does the effects of cortisol have on your body and what diseases arise from it, as well as make some connections between the nervous system with the short-term response and linking ideas back to the sympathetic nervous system. I also want you to continue learning about the terminology hyper and hypo when it comes to hormone release. So we're going to start with hormone regulation and stress response, the adrenal gland. So you can see here's your little adrenal gland, little hat on your kidney. And in the short-term, long-term stress response loop, you learned that cortisol can be secreted from it and epinephrine and all that stuff when we talked about both different ones. We're going to look specifically at the adrenal gland. So in your notes, back into how it should function, let's talk about the adrenal gland. So the adrenal gland is located above each kidney. It is made up of two parts. There's the inside called the medulla and the outside called the cortex. Okay. Now, we do not need to know the medulla and the cortex. We just need to know that the adrenal gland is the adrenal gland and that it controls both the nervous system and hormone response. Now, for being specific, the adrenal medulla deals with nervous system responses. So meaning that quick short-term stress, your sympathetic nervous system, when you get that bang, that rush of epinephrine, that deals with the inside of your adrenal gland. The outside of your adrenal gland is what deals with long-term stress or cortisol that is being secreted. So the adrenal medulla is activated by the nervous system, and it is in response to short-term stress, so that fight or flight, and it deals with epinephrine and norepinephrine, or adrenaline and noradrenaline. All right. When you have effects, and this is in your loop, so you kind of already saw this, the effects of it are you're going to see a spike in blood glucose, okay, by converting glycogen to glucose, so glycogen from the liver back to glucose, so that we can use it for cell respiration, so we can get bursts of energy. Our heart rate's going to speed up, our breathing's going to speed up, our blood vessels are going to dilate or get bigger, and our pupils dilate. All of this should make sense because you're like, oh, the sympathetic nervous system, right? Those are the effects of the sympathetic nervous system controlled by the adrenal medulla due to the fact that we're going to secrete some epinephrine. Now, when it comes to cortisol, cortisol comes from the adrenal cortex and it's in the center. And it is about long-term stress. Now, adrenal cortexes, okay, they actually secrete cortisol over long periods of time. And in short amounts, cortisol is actually really good for you. However, if something's wrong with your adrenal cortex, you're going to have issues with secretion of cortisol. Now, the picture you have in your notes shows kind of a split between Cushing's and Addison's. You can write some stuff down beside the pictures on what goes wrong in adrenal glands. So Addison's disease is essentially when you have too little or hypo secretion of cortisol, so too little. All right. When you don't have enough cortisol, you're going to see weight loss. You're going to have low amounts of energy. Your blood pressure is going to decrease, and you're actually going to get something called hyperpigmentation. So it almost looks like you've been sitting under a really bad tanning bed for a really long time. Your skin goes like an orange color. Okay. Now, you can also get that orangey brown deposits around your teeth, around your gums, in your mouth, and that's called hyper, too much pigmentation in an area. So that's Addison's disease. Cushing's disease is the opposite. It's when you have too much cortisol and there's probably a tumor or something in the adrenal cortex. We call this Cushing's. Cushing's syndrome causes what we call moon face, where you have like this like jowl, the jowls drop down. Okay. It creates fat deposits in your back. So you get something called the buffalo hump. So your back gets this hump that comes up. Your abdomen starts to swell and you get these red stretch marks. You bruise really easily. You have troubles healing wounds. And this is all because of hypersecretion of cortisol. So when it goes all wrong in your adrenal glands, we have a couple things happening. The most abundant, what we call glucocorticoid or steroid hormone, works in conjunction with epinephrine. Okay. So it the cortisol is the most abundant out of all the steroid hormones. It works with epinephrine, but epinephrine is more secreted for the nervous system. Cortisol is long lasting and it raises your blood glucose levels. That's why over time it's not good because it breaks down your muscle protein into amino acids and converts it into glucose in the liver, which is fine, but over a long period of time, too much glucose in your blood is a bad thing. That's high blood sugars, okay, which we learned could lead to hyperglycemia. Now, this can be a bad thing because if you are secreting cortisol over a long period of time, it probably means that you have high stress levels. High stress levels also mean possibly damage to the heart because your vessels constrict, which makes it harder for your heart to pump blood. Causes high blood pressure because you have to push more blood through your heart because your vessels are constricted. High glucose could lead to diabetes, chances of infection because your body can't do the proper healing, okay? Over time, high stress levels can possibly lead to an early death, all right? But we learned earlier that if you look at stress correctly, you could probably overcome that. Now, the one thing that is really good about cortisol is that is a natural anti-inflammatory. So it actually helps with inflammation all around the body when secreted in small amounts. So when it goes wrong in the short-term stress response, it usually means there's some sort of tumor on your endocrine gland, your medulla, and it is responsible for too much epinephrine. Now, I will not test you on any of this. This pheochromocytoma is just a little extra because we talk so much about cortisol. It's always nice to talk about the other one. It's really hard to diagnose this. It's done through a blood test or MRIs and CT scans, but it is hard to find. The thing about it that is good, though, is that these pheochromocytomas don't always mean cancer, okay? They can just mean a tumor or a buildup of cells in your medulla, which is causing issues with your short-term stress response, releasing too much epinephrine at a time. So you've seen this, you've drawn some sort of stress loop. So this is the stress loop just one more time. Here's my hypothalamus and I'm getting stress. Now, if it's short-term stress, it goes directly to my spinal cord, straight to my medulla, adrenal medulla, epinephrine, norepinephrine are secreted. If it's long-term stress, that long-term stress is going to go from the hypothalamus down to the anterior pituitary, which releases the ACTH, the adrenal corticotropic hormone, which then ACTH goes to the adrenal cortex and releases my glucocorticoids, which are my cortisols. So in regards to short-term stress response, okay, the fight or flight response or our anxiety responses, this is just looking back at what it was like when we talked about the sympathetic nervous system. Remember, we got that flushed skin, rapid heartbeat, dilated pupils, trembling from too much epinephrine, okay? You can have colon contractions. You can feel your body feels anxiety and stress. These are due to the fact that we release epinephrine. So let's quickly review. Glucocorticoids increase your blood sugar, and mineral corticoids increase blood pressure. We have not talked about mineral corticoids yet, but we will. Okay. Adrenal cortex secretes small amounts of both female and male sex hormones, which I didn't talk about, but just an interesting fact, and those are called gonadocorticoids. Okay. And when we talk in chapter 14 and 15, we're going to talk about the testes and ovaries and this. So as a reminder, what is the role of cortisol in your body? That is key. Define hypo and hyper secretion of cortisol, and what does it result in? Addison's and Cushing's, okay? And short-term stress response is linked to what system in your body? Short-term stress response is linked to your fight or flight or your sympathetic nervous system. So that's it. That is the adrenal glands and the diseases that they cause. Again, I will not ask you about the medulla, the epinephrine diseases, but Addison's and Cushing's I will. If you have any questions, please let me know.